What's up, y'all? It's been a minute with these videos, but as I'm sure you can see, it's because I'm in a new location. That's right. In December, I moved, and so with, the Thanksgiving and the December holidays and all the moving and stuff, I've really not had time to sit down and make videos, but now I am finally settled in for the most part, well, at least enough to start making some videos again, so that's what we're doing now, yay! So the topic I'm going to be discussing today mainly comes from the fact that I've seen a few people comment about wanting it or wanting me to talk about it. So yeah, that's kind of the reason I'm going to discuss it, because honestly this topic is not super hard to do, so I never really thought to make a video for it, but if y'all want to know how it's done, I am more than happy to explain it. And that, of course, is lining the inside of the fursuit mouth. So for this vid, I am going to basically be going over 3 of the main-ish ways to do it, and then I'm going to go over some materials, and then maybe just, some extra tips and stuff. I'm not going to really mess around with tips for these videos. I'm basically just going to tell you how to do it, because again, like I said, it's not super hard, so let's get into it. So the first technique is what I'm going to call the under technique, I guess you could say. This is when the lining of the fursuit mouth goes under the fur. And how you do it is you make your foam base, get it all done, then you take whatever material you're going to be using for lining the mouth and you glue it onto the inside of the fursuit mouth. You really don't have to worry about patterning for this technique, because when you glue down the fabric, you can trim it as you like. You definitely can pattern the inside of the mouth to make, the perfect shape if you want, but you don't have to. So again, just take your fabric and glue it down, trim it up as you see fit. Make sure it overlaps the edges of the mouth a little bit, just so it's got some overlap. And then you tape up your foam base as you would with, don't tape the inside of the mouth, and you get your fur and you basically just fur your head and you glue the fur on the edges of the mouth down over the lining fabric, and voila, you have your under technique done and your mouth is lined. Next is going to be what I will call the over technique, and it is exactly the opposite of the under, just like it sounds like. This is when the lining of the fursuit mouth goes over the fur that is lining, the top and bottom of the muzzle. To do this technique, what you'll need to do is you'll need to, finish your foam base. Then you will tape up your foam base, you'll cut out all the fur. Make sure to tape the inside of the mouth for this one, because this one is reliant on a pattern. And then once you have your entire foam base furred, you're going to take the pattern from the inside of the mouth and you're going to, cut it out of your desired fabric. And then you're going to take it and you're going to glue it down on top of the fur. One important part of this technique is make sure when you are furring your head that the fur for the edges of the muzzle, wherever you're going to have the lining be, make sure it overlaps, because the lining needs to go on top of the fur. If you take the lining and you kind of line it right up with the fur on the side of the mouth, it might look weird, it might not match up, so you always want to have it go under the lining of the mouth, so always make sure it overlaps a bit. But yeah, you take your pieces that you just cut out of your lining fabric and you basically glue them on top of the fur, and there you go, you have the over technique. Finally, the last main technique is the sewing technique. Now, if you're not to the level where you sew all your pattern pieces together like a big sock and then you just pull it over your foam base, you can kind of disregard this technique because it falls into that category. But if you do that, basically this technique is just when you tape up your foam base, you tape the inside of the mouth to get the pattern, you cut it out along with the fur, and then you sew it into the fur just like everything else, and you pull it over the foam base, just like the sock with the fur. So it's basically just sewing the lining into the fur as well, and it all being one big piece. This is the technique that I use. Again, this might be considered a more advanced technique if you're not to the level of sewing all your pieces. So if you don't do that, don't worry about this. Sticking to the over and under techniques is totally fine. I even see makers who, they sew all their furs and they still do the over and under technique versus sewing their lining in. So it's really all a matter of preference. But yeah, those are the 3 techniques. Like I said before, it's really not that hard to line the inside of the mouth, so I feel like my explanations might have been a little bit short. But I do understand that if you don't know how to do it, it might be a little confusing at first. So I hope I shed some light on it. Again, there's no shame in doing any of the techniques at any level. You don't have to think, oh, because I'm gluing down the lining on the inside of the mouth, I'm a less skilled maker. Because again, really, it's up to you. It's what you think looks good, and it's what is easiest for you. So do whatever you want. And of course, these aren't the only ways to line mouths. So if you have a different way, go for it. Have fun with it. So your go-to material for lining the inside of the mouth should be Lycra or spandex or whatever you want to call it. This is the material that people use to make bathing suits, to, you know, make leotards. It's like the stretchy action fabric. This is the best material to use for lining the inside of the mouth because it is meant to, you know, keep people cool. It's meant to work with people who are like active, and so when you're breathing on the inside of your fursuit mouth, you're getting you know, heat and moisture, and this fabric does not really hold moisture, so it's not gonna like heat you up from the inside. It's really good for keeping you cool, especially in the mouth area. It comes in a lot of colors. It can be bought at your local craft store. It comes in solids and patterns, whatever you want. So I highly suggest getting this fabric to line the inside of your mouth because it is going to work the best. The second fabric I'm going to tell you about, I'm not going to suggest this. It works, but it doesn't work super well, is fleece/felt. The reason I'm suggesting this one is because if you for some reason can't find Lycra, fleece is a good alternative. The only downside with it is that it is not very good at keeping moisture out. It probably will get hot on the inside of your fursuit as you breathe, so definitely keep that in mind. I might keep this fabric more to like your personal suits if you want, but again, it can work in a pinch, so always keep it in mind. It's a good, like, you know, all utility fleece. Felt falls into the same category. Again, I wouldn't use it as your first choice, but it actually does keep the moisture and stuff away a little better than fleece, so maybe default to it before you default to fleece if you have to. But again, those are second choices, I would say, to the Lycra. Only really use them if you don't have, you know, any other options, or if it's a personal suit and you really don't care, because I'm definitely guilty of that. And finally, this is a fabric that I know I have a friend who would get mad at me for even saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway, is Minke. I really would not suggest using Minke on the inside of your mouth. So you're wondering, well then why am I telling you about it? One reason, it looks good. Yeah, that's right, Minke does look good. I have seen makers use it before, which is one reason I tried it, and I was like, wow, that looks so pretty, it looks so good. And then I put it on the inside of one of my fursuits, and I suffocated because Minke is very, very good at holding heat and holding moisture, so it's going to heat up super fast. It's going to get wet from like your breathing, it's going to get hot, so I really don't suggest using Minke unless you want to go for that aesthetic. If you really want it to look good versus function right, then go for it. But again, I figured I would say it anyways, because for those of you out there who, you know, are looking for that look versus function kind of thing, Minke is a good choice. If you do want to keep cool in your fursuit head, I highly suggest not using Minke, but again, it's an option depending on what you value. Okay, and finally for this video, I'm going to go over one tip per technique, I guess you could say. So my tip for the under technique, if you choose to do it, I highly suggest finding something to line the edges with. It could be a strip of fleece, which is when I did this technique, that's what I did. I just took a strip of fleece or felt and I, you know, lined the edges. It could be cording. I've definitely seen other makers do that, you know, for more like gum effect, but it really could be anything. I just highly suggest lining it because for two reasons. First of all, it adds a good finish to, you know, the edge of your fur, so you don't just have a raw edge. And two, you risk fraying fabric if you just leave the edge raw. So sealing it with something definitely helps keep it, you know, looking good longer. So again, I would highly suggest sealing the edges of the fur with something for the best look and to help seal the fabric to keep it lasting longer. My tip for the over technique is First of all, fabric-wise, I would definitely use felt for this technique. The one thing I will also say is do not use Lycra for this technique. I know I just said it was the best fabric to be used, but the problem with Lycra for the over technique is you do have fur under, and Lycra is extremely malleable. It doesn't really hold a shape very well. So if you lay it on top of fur, it might crinkle or like take the shape of the fur, be all lumpy. It just won't look good. So I definitely suggest using a harder fabric, a sturdier fabric for this technique, which is why I say felt. Fleece again can be used, but fleece is kind of like Lycra in the sense that it can be like, you know, molded a lot better, so it doesn't hold its shape as much. Felt, especially hard felt, is much better at keeping its shape, and when you glue it on top of the fur, it will stay, you know, straight, and it will overcome the bumpiness of the fur and keep its like smooth texture. So again, I really suggest using felt or anything a little more hard in terms of fabric for this technique, just to make sure that it keeps its shape and it's looking as smooth as it can be. And finally, for the sewing technique, I actually can't really think of any tips for this other than to say, once you have it sewn in and you have the whole sock, when you're putting it over the foam, pull it and stretch it as best you can. Make sure it's really smooth, because if you just pull it over the foam, it's kind of just going to do whatever it wants. So make sure you really mess with it. Make sure you pull it. Like, don't be afraid to actually really adjust it, and you'll definitely get your best results that way. But again, that's kind of all I really have to say about the sewing technique. It's my favorite technique. I think it looks the best because it creates the, you know, most seamless look, because you don't have to like finish it with cording. You have to like smooth it out. It's just there. But yeah, don't push yourself to do it if you don't want to. It's just my personal preference. Alright everyone, that is the end of this video. I want to say this one was short, but again, if I say that, it always ends up being like 15 minutes long. But anyways, I hope I helped you all out who were, you know, wondering how to do this. I think you all noticed that I didn't mention teeth at any part in this video, and that's because teeth are their own thing. If I talked about them in tandem with the mouth, this video would be super long, so I figured I'll leave teeth to their own video. I was gonna say if you want to see that, let me know, but I feel like I almost kind of have to talk about teeth now, because teeth and lining the inside of the mouth do go in tandem, because, you know, sometimes they overlap and all that stuff. So I'll probably be making a video on how to do teeth on the inside of your fursuit mouth in the future. But until then, like I said, I hope you learned something. I hope I could help. If you didn't learn something, as always, feel free to laugh at me. And then until next time, bye!